Everyone, welcome to another awesome video at learningfilemaker.com. Some of our videos are more basic in nature with kind of the nuts and bolts of how to do things. And some of the videos are kind of out there on the bleeding edge. And when we do that, sometimes we bring in our mad scientist type folks, and one of which is sitting across from me. Hi, William.
Hello.
And today we're talking about something that's definitely not authorized by FileMaker, but it's kind of cutting edge stuff in a lot of ways. And that is the use of a non-approved device for accessing Web Direct, right? Now, in previous videos, we talked about how Web Direct will work pretty well on a Chromebook, which are those dedicated kind of inexpensive laptops that run the Chrome OS, which is basically kind of a fancy Android laptop, right? That kind of thing. And some of them work really well. We have a review. We were talking about the 4 gigabyte one from Samsung. That was it Samsung? I think so, Samsung. Pretty good device. It was really responsive. And so even though FileMaker says that that browser that runs on the Chromebook is not an approved browser, it still works pretty well on that device because it is a derivation of Chrome, right? And so FileMaker supporting Chrome, and if you have a modern Chrome browser, probably you're going to be okay. But FileMaker doesn't list Chromebooks as supported devices. So this is one of those kind of conversations today that's even a little bit more interesting, and that is the Raspberry Pi. Now, this is a little tiny computer that we went on to Amazon and we bought for 41 bucks. It's just a little logic board. But it has a gig of RAM on it and 4 processors. And so one of my customers actually went off on their own and built a solution that uses this as an easy way to input judging results for snowboarders. So snowboarders are doing all their awesome moves, flying through the air. They're trying out for the World Championships. They're trying out for the Olympics. They do all this sort of stuff. And the judges have to sit there in the snow drinking coffee and scoring them. And they wanted an inexpensive scoring device. Well, of course, most people in the FileMaker platform would say, hey, just get a iPad or iPhone or something like that. The thing is that they were expensive and they wanted a dedicated little keyboard, a numeric keyboard that hooked into the computer. And so then you start talking about an iPad, which was our original solution for them, and the keys were on screen. They could touch the keys on screen. The problem was that, well, it's not hard to figure out. The cost of an iPad, base model with Wi-Fi and everything else and cellular anymore is, $700-800, whatever it's going to be. So they said, we need something cheaper that if it gets trashed, we're not worried about. And so comes the Raspberry Pi. Now, the Raspberry Pi doesn't run Mac, and it doesn't run Windows. What does it run, William?
We're running a specific version of Linux called Raspbian, which is a derivative of the Debian Linux distribution customized to run on your Raspberry Pi device.
So that's a lot of words and nouns, and the short version was it's Linux, right?
Yes.
Right. So the evil scientist here came to me and said, oh, this would be really cool. Let's do this. Customer was doing this, and I wanted to see what the idea was about. Well, we bought the device, and the logic board is 41 bucks. And we're going to actually put one together here for you. So we have the logic board here. Then eventually we put it into this clear case, which was like $8, but you can get different kinds of cases. In fact, the customer had a case with an integrated 4 or 5 inch LCD screen in the case, which is really cool. So it's almost like an iPod Touch that way. It's a computer in it, integrated with the case and the screen. And that was, a little extra money. Off the top of my head, I don't remember how much it was, but another like $50 or $40 or whatever. But pricing this specific device out, we're talking $41 for the board, $8 for the case. Now the hard drive is it's not really a hard spinny drive. It's a little SSD. It's
micro SSD card, like you put in one of those newer phones. Very, very small, but relatively high capacity.
Okay, so we put a 32 gig in this one, and so we bought that. Then we needed a Wi-Fi card, and then we had to get a keyboard. Now the keyboard we got, I was looking online. The problem is hard to see the scale of the keyboard. This is a business card. And this is the keyboard, right? So you can't see it too much, but it's a little on the small side, right? So but it's got a touch pad on it, which was kind of cool. So you can see me. There it goes. It wakes up. So you can drive it around on screen, which is interesting. But I find myself missing my full-size mouse and keyboard. And so this was kind of cute and clever. It was $18 for this, but I don't know if you really would want to use this. you can use a standard USB keyboard or mouse with it. So that's pretty cool. So what's the output? So we got 41 and 8 and what, another $10 for the SD card or whatever it is. And then, $10 for the Wi-Fi. And so this whole thing comes out to be about a $100 computer, right? And so we basically have a $100 computer. It's got 4 processors on it.
For a quad-core processor.
A quad core. Okay, so there's 8 cores or 4 cores? There's 4 cores, right?
Yeah.
4 total cores. And 900 megahertz and 1 gig of RAM, which is pretty lightweight if you think about it. But it will run Linux pretty well, and it'll run a browser, which gets us to Web Direct. Now, we're going to go ahead and boot it up here. And as you'll see, it goes through this song and dance, almost like Windows, where it's almost a command line kind of, it's giving us verbose feedback as to what it's doing. And if you're a Unix, Linux kind of guy, then this is all exciting for you. I'm trying to understand the business case for this. And what you end up doing is instead of the minimum computer on the Mac side for WebDirect being $500 at a minimum, which clearly has way more power than this, you have a very minimal purchase and you can build like custom devices. So as you can see from the screenshot from the snowboard people, they have the device and it's got the touch screen on it. And then there's the USB keyboard that's attached to it. So they have this numeric keypad, which is cool. And then they're logging on to FileMaker Server 14 somewhere close by or maybe on the cloud somewhere. And they're inputting the scores for the cool moves that are happening. Now, as we put it all back together, we plug in the cables that you can see here. The box is cute and cuddly. And what makes it almost unwieldy is all these cables that are all over the place, right? I'm almost inclined, William, to think that you'd want to just attach this to the back of a monitor or something like that, right? I mean...
The nice thing about the Raspberry Pi is that it is so small and inconspicuous. I know people who've put them inside walls, behind big screen TVs, under, on top of cabinets, under cabinets. Basically, as long as it doesn't get too hot in there, you can kind of cram it wherever it'll fit.
Right. Now, there's this big interface here at the top that you see. And what is supposed to connect into that? Is that where the monitor... Well, the monitor goes in the side in the HDMI. So what is this big port for?
That's GPIO, General Purpose Input-Output. That would be for, if you've seen people who build things with Arduinos, custom motors, lights, switches, other more tangible paraphernalia could be plugged into there. If you wanted to do something custom, you could actually get a pigtail out and then connect those wires to raw electronics to do things, and those pins would be controlled directly by the processor.
Wow, that's very cool. Well, let's talk about it in the case of FileMaker. I mean, we saw kind of on screen a little bit the scoring. It's like 5 fields of information. We're actually here. We booted onto the desktop here, and I'm going to go ahead and press the button so we can click and put in the browser. Now, what browser is this?
The browser is it's something called Epiphany. You can see here it's actually even more generic, Web.
Yeah.
And you can see here down a few lines, you'll see WebKit. It's based off the same engine that powers Safari and Chrome, but it's the open source version of that, and it's kind of tweaked a little to be a little more efficient with the Raspberry Pi's very limited capabilities.
Yeah. We did try an older version of Chromium on this, and it's actually slower than this. This browser was faster.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we bring up the browser here. And we can type in the URL for our WebDirect server, and we can go into this contacts demo. And, of course, FileMaker is going to ask us for the username and passwords. We need to put that in. And, of course, that's all support. And, of course, the little micro keyboard is going to be problematic for that. Lots of data entry with this is not so good. But you do the input, and then we log in. And after a little hemming and hawing, it gets all drawn in. And the real trick for people is to click between the records and see what the response time is, and it's not horrible. I don't know if that's a good way of explaining, something is useful that it's not horrible. I mean, frankly, it feels a lot like WebDirect felt in 13 on desktop computers. Now, WebDirect 14 on regular desktop computers is snappy, snap, fast. WebDirect 14 on the Raspberry Pi feels like a whole generation back in terms of speed. But if you have a simple solution, like here's one. Like if we navigate this layout and we have like 5 fields, like our scoring. If someone's jumping through the air and they're doing the routine, they do the routine over 90 seconds. And because basically with judging, and I've done judging with aerobatic events and things like that before. You have a judge and you have almost like a scribe, and the person sitting there writing down the notes or taking the scores down. And so one person's going to be watching the aerobatics or acrobatics or whatever they're judging unfold, and the other person's going to be sitting there taking notes and scoring. And sometimes you've seen judges with recording devices, they'll be doing a voice record. So it's going to be run by a person next to them inputting the data. So they would click in these fields, clearly in this the judging, but they have a 5-field solution, so it's not an overly complex solution. Now we have opened this up with FM Starting Point, and it does seem to work, but the more things you put into it, the slower it seems to run, right? It's just one of those sort of things. Also, tell me about the video on the Raspberry Pi, because I had a number of people tell me you don't want to put a giant monitor onto this. So there's really no dedicated video subsystem, right? Or
yeah, this is so the Raspberry Pi was created by the Raspberry Pi Foundation. There were some folks who worked, I think one of them was actually an employee of Broadcom, one of the leading producers of systems on chips, basically the chips on your phone that kind of includes everything. You look at the Raspberry Pi board, and there's only 2 or 3 chips on there. That's because most everything's baked into a single chip. And working with the cell phone world, you see that these chips can be very inexpensive when purchased in very large volumes, but they looked at the learning computers available, and they were either a lot less powerful or a lot more expensive. And so he had connections, and he struck a deal to get the system on chips. And you would find, a few generations back. And so what you have here is basically the guts of an older iPhone, instead of neatly crammed into something designed by Johnny Ive, kind of laid out on this larger board. And they get these at a much lower cost because they're a charitable foundation. The purpose of these computers is actually to encourage people to fiddle with them. Subsequently, the video horsepower this thing has is closer to an older iPhone than what you would find in a modern Android phone that's got a 1080p screen and it's designed to play 3D games and all that kind of stuff. The chip here is going to be older and not really designed to do crazy drawing. So in this particular case, our demonstrations on a 15-inch monitor, 17-inch monitor, not something that would go as well if you had a huge 20-something inch monitor that you were driving beyond 1080. It's just going to have a lot harder time pushing enough pixels to pick up to keep.
Well,
up.
And this thing apparently really likes it when you put it like a 5-inch or 6-inch or 4-inch screen on it. I mean, I think it drives even better that way.
Yeah, that in that case, again, you think about the resolution of the original iPhone, those first few generations of real smartphones. That's more what this piece of hardware is geared for.
Right. So we have a device that's designed to be probably about $100 out the door. And what generation? I mean, we're shooting this video towards the end of 2015 as we head into the last quarter here. What generation? I mean, this is the Raspberry Pi 1, 2, 5. What is this?
This is the Raspberry Pi 2. And so they have the A plus, and B, which of course, what comes after B is of course the number 2. It's okay, they're British.
Oh, they are British? Okay.
Yeah. They're just be happy they're not doing it with Roman numerals or something. And so it's if you see the ports when we're taking it apart, the earlier versions kind of have them angled, spread out differently. In this particular case, the ports are all on 2 sides, makes it a lot easier to deal with, makes the case will work a lot better. It's a lot easier to get at things. It's just a polished and updated version. Still pokey by today's standards, about twice, 50 to 100% faster than the original version, but mainly easier to work with.
So this is a hobbyist kind of hack a tool together is what I think of, but it seems like it might play well with the Internet of Things, which is this modern term for refrigerators that are on the internet and toasters, and your toaster sends you a tweet or something that the toast is ready. I mean, that's kind of a crazy example. Another example they had at a recent I don't know, it was a big conference. The company had a app that told you when your cat took a dump in the sandbox, and it told you what kind of dump it was. And they were trying to get startup funding for cat dumps, and I was like, okay. So anyway, so you can wire up all sorts of things with this. With that I/O connector there, you could wire up the cat dumper analyzer thing, right? I mean,
yeah, and the goal is where previous generations, young people would be involved with electronics, hobbyists, ham radio. A lot of that's kind of gone by the wayside, and the goal here is to get the next generation of folks involved with, fiddling, doing crazy things, And so, well, maybe they can grow up and be part of, the design team that works on the Apple Watch. Get people interested in electronic engineering. Design, software, integration.
Yeah, but working with the basis of a machine that's already constructed
and easy to get at, easy to extend, easy to work with.
Okay, so the fit in the FileMaker world, if there is that understand one that this is not an approved use of FileMaker Web Direct. So up front, that if you play with this and something doesn't work, for example, I think the snowboard people said that couple of the colors of some of the layout objects were off a little bit as opposed to desktop, and they wanted to complain to me about this. I said, don't complain to me. You're on unsupported computer, unsupported operating system, and unsupported web browser. I mean, what part of unsupported don't you get? They were lucky that it was off a couple shades of gray or whatever it was. I thought that was a minor problem considering the hack that they'd put forward. But it works pretty well for them. And so besides it being unauthorized, we're talking about a $100 web browser that you can configure to do all sorts of things. And once again, you have to have a little bit of the command line skill set in there. But from the perspective of this device has been set up to boot automatically into this desktop environment, right? So, and in fact, you set all this up for us. I said, well, let's get a Raspberry Pi, and what do you want it to do? Well, I told you, automatically boot to a desktop interface, this GUI, and then I could select the browser, is what I told you. And so how hard was it for you to do that?
Relatively straightforward. If you go to Raspberry Pi, just Google Raspberry Pi, the first result will take you to the Raspberry Pi Foundation website. They actually have a setup file called Noob, for newbie. Like if you're like, I don't know anything, well, that's okay. They have something for you. You download the zip file, and if you've worked with this sort of thing, I've worked with earlier generations, you have to image things and make sure you have the right format and convert things. You don't have to deal with any of that. Take your card, make sure it's blank, unzip the zip file, copy the files onto the card, stick it in the Raspberry Pi, and you're off to the races.
So you stuck the card in your Mac, but doesn't matter, Mac or Windows, whatever. Then you wrote the files on the card.
Yes, just drag and drop. No imaging, none of that.
And then you put the card in this, and when you boot up, it starts to read those files automatically.
Yes, and it boots to a relatively simple installer. There are menu options, but it's very terminally, only 2 or 3 colors, big text. And what you do is you sort of select option, 1. I don't recall if it was option 1 or option 3. And you basically select, tell me how I'd like to boot. Would you like to boot to the command line, or would you like to boot to the graphical? Would you like to boot once or boot always, and you just basically tell it.
So we set it to boot always into the graphical interface.
Yes. Now,
what's the graphical interface called? Is a specific name for that, or is it?
I don't know. I think this is running XFCE.
Now, is that part of the Noob install?
Yes, it's part of the default setup. If you're familiar with Gnome or KDE, things like that would be used with newer computers that are a little more resource intensive. This is laid out differently. It's not as powerful, but it does a lot better on the minimal resources. You're not going to see any fancy, when you change desktops, it's going to be a big rotating cube, or there's no transparency, no, window manager to help me help me manage the 23 open windows I have. It's really geared to be out of the way and be very low powered so as not to overburden the limited resources of the Raspberry Pi.
Right. And to also help everyone here, you've created a Quickie Checklist. What did you do to help us all out here?
Yeah, I basically took and boiled down the instructions available from Raspberry Pi itself, and you can go back and refer to them. They give you some instructions to format, memory cards a specific way with a specific thing. In my particular case, I didn't need to do that. And basically, here's a list of the basic steps with some screenshots to help you through. The nice thing about the Raspberry Pi is it's very popular, very well used. If you say, well, hey, William, these instructions are crazy, or that doesn't cover my problem, if Google doesn't answer your problem, YouTube probably will. It's lots of people are using this, and if you've decided that you really want your Raspberry Pi to do this, if you type Raspberry Pi blah, apparently I've learned today from you, Richard, that Raspberry Pi Litterbox will get a hit on YouTube. And so if you can think about it, YouTube can probably help you out.
Well, William, I appreciate it. Thanks for showing us all the cool stuff with Raspberry Pi. Just understand that this is a cool area to play with, but it's certainly a non-approved area. So in the event that something doesn't work just right, complaining to FileMaker will probably result in no response or a response if that's not supported. So just keep in mind there's a fun area to play with. It might be very practical for a application you might have in a warehouse or something like that, where an iPad is just too much or doesn't fit the need. And if you want to hack something together, I mean, keep in mind cameras integrate with these, so you could wire in a camera with this. So I guess the next trick is to figure out how to make FileMaker Pro work on it, right? That'd be the trick.
You actually can.
You can?
You could theoretically load an x86 emulator on there, and then with Wine in the x86 emulator, open FileMaker Pro.
Yeah, but that would be probably
Glacially slow.
Glacially slow. So that'll answer that question too. So, well, William, thanks again. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.